Joining me now is the Democratic Senator from Virginia, Mark Warner. He's Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Warner, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Well, thank you, Chuck. And first of all, congratulations to you and your team for 70 great years of journalism.
That I appreciate. Hopefully we'll be here for another 70. Let me start with what we learned this week, or what you learned this week from the special counsel's indictments. Do you believe that the fact that we've already seen some stories change this week, or additional information about either contacts with Russians or ideas of meeting with Russians, do you feel like that's all coming from the indictments, that this is the impact of those first indictments from the special counsel?
Well, the committee itself has been aware of some of this information, and we've been continuing to work. I know you're going to have my friend James Langford on later. Right. I'm very proud our committee is the only bipartisan group still looking at this. What we did see this week, though, was one more example of at least where the Russians had what appeared to be a fairly organized effort in terms of trying to reach out to folks affiliated with the Trump campaign to share, quote-unquote, dirt or emails about Hillary Clinton. We've seen it with the case of Mr. Papadopoulos. We saw it in the case of the so-called June 9th meeting with Donald Trump Jr. We've got a lot more questions to get answered. We've got a number of other individuals that we're going to want to interview. Our effort is separate, obviously, from the special prosecutors, but I think we're both proceeding ahead.
But I'm curious, does the threat of indictments to come, which I'm sure many folks believe is happening inside the Mueller probe, probably you expect them as well, is that going to make folks more cooperative with your investigation, or do you fear now that because the Mueller probe is intensifying, that the fear of legal jeopardy will actually make them clam up with you?
Well, we've actually interviewed literally a couple hundred individuals, many times without actually even the knowledge of the press. We've worked with a lot of these individuals cooperatively. We've got more to do. Obviously, Mueller's got a different lane, and as people fall into the realm of legal jeopardy, they may be less willing to talk to us. But I've been very pleased so far in terms of the level of cooperation we've had from virtually everyone.
Is there a point, though, where you're going to run into each other?
Listen, just as if you look back in the days of the Watergate, there was a special congressional committee. There was also a special prosecutor. Yeah. We've got different lanes. Yeah. You know, they're looking for criminal indictment. We're trying to make sure that we find out what happened in 2016. Was there collusion? We've got a different factual basis that we're trying to hit at. And I think, you know, we're going to have to find ways to deconflict, and I think we will continue to do that.
Have you interviewed George Papadopoulos?
Listen, I'm not going to talk about which witnesses that we've seen or not seen, but the chairman and I did indicate that Mr. Papadopoulos had been on our screen for a long time.
Okay, so you're not confirming or denying whether you've interviewed him?
Again, what the chairman and I have said is we don't comment on specific witnesses, but we put out a joint statement that Mr. Papadopoulos had been on our screen for a long time.
Let me ask you about former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and his son, Michael G. Flynn. I know there were reports that your committee was meeting resistance from them when it comes to cooperating with your investigation. Are you still meeting resistance with the two of them?
Chuck, again, the way we get the kind of cooperation with the witnesses is frankly to not share the kind of weekly box score of who we've seen and who we've not seen. We've got a lot of folks that we have seen. We've got more folks that we need to. You know, end of the day, what we owe the American people is the truth, and most importantly, how we make sure that we don't have a foreign power and a foreign power like Russia intervene again in our elections. That's really important, whether it's the potential issues around collusion or the kind of questions we've seen in terms of interference with 21 states' electoral systems, or the stuff that we've dealt with this week in terms of some of the social media interactions.
Right. Let me quickly ask you about the Steele dossier. The chair, your partner there, Republican Senator Richard Burr, said you've hit a brick wall on the Steele dossier. You had confirmed or had been able to rebuild it, I think is what he said, going back to June, sort of, but you'd hit a brick wall, in part because you hadn't been able to speak to Mr. Steele. Have you still hit that brick wall, or have you broken through it?
Listen, I think the Steele dossier, there's been lots of press interest in who paid for it. Obviously, we've got evidence now that there was Republican payments, Democratic payments. At the end of the day, what I want to know is what's true in the Steele dossier and what's not true. This is a fairly damning indictment out there that's in that dossier, and I wish Mr. Steele would sit down and talk to our committee. We've reached out. He's refused to do so far. We still hold out the option that the chairman and I have said we'll meet him any place, anywhere.
I want to ask you about something that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said about social media companies. I know you want to try to come up with some legislation that makes advertising more transparent, but listen to an idea he brought up with Hugh Hewitt on Saturday.
What we ought to do with regard to the Russians is retaliate, seriously retaliate against the Russians. And these tech firms could be helpful in having us, giving us a way to do that.
What do you think of that idea, getting the tech companies to cooperate in a retaliatory strike of some sort against the Russians?
Well, Chuck, I actually agree with the majority leader that we need a cyber doctrine. For a long time, I think we have had incoming, whether it was Russians, Chinese, others, where we've had cyber attacks, misinformation, disinformation attacks. We need to have both defense and offensive capabilities. But I also believe we need to make sure that we apply at least the lightest touch possible. I was in the tech business for 20 years. I'm pro-tech, I'm pro-innovation, but I think at the basics, we ought to make sure that when we're receiving political advertising, these companies would work with us to make sure that we identify if a foreign power is behind that advertising. I think Americans have a right to know.
All right, Senator Warner, I have to leave it there for time. Senator, thanks for coming on and sharing your views. I appreciate it.